THE CANAL, part of Chapter 9 of A History of Horncastle from the earliest period to the present time, by James Conway Walter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Canal. The Horncastle Canal, connecting for commerce the town with the River Witham, and so with Lincoln, Boston, and the sea, though now a derelict, was formerly of much value. Its history is here given from its earliest inception. Horncastle having been for some centuries the chief market of an important agricultural district, an association was formed towards the close of the 18th century with the title the Company of Proprietors of Horncastle Navigation, in the county of Lincoln. This was, in the year 1792, incorporated by an Act of Parliament, which gave a list of the names of the original members, and secured to them, and to their successors, perpetual possession of the same, and a common seal. The canal was to be 11 miles long, extending from the junction of the two rivers, Bain and Waring, which traverse the town and meet at the point where now stands the public swimming bath, to the Witham at Tattershall, and passing through the parishes of Thornton, Martin, Dalderby, Roughton, Hortham, Kirkby, Coningsby, and Tattershall. The company had at first a capital of £15,000 in £50 shares, no member being allowed to hold less than one share or more than 20. The surveyors for the undertaking were Messrs. Robert Stickney and Samuel Dickinson. When about 2/3 of the work was completed, this capital was exhausted, and in the year 1800 a second Act of Parliament was obtained, which authorised the raising of a supplementary sum of £20,000 in shares of £50, additional members being enrolled, and mortgages raised on the tolls. The whole profits of the concern, for several years, were absorbed in paying off the debt thus contracted, so that no dividend accrued for the shareholders until the year 1813. The channel, from Horncastle to Dalderby, was an entirely new cut, the rest being the River Bain deepened and straightened in its course. It was adapted for the passage of vessels of 50 tons burden, and in the whole length of 11 miles there was a fall of 84 feet. The original rate of charges was 2 shillings per ton for the whole length of the canal, 1 shilling and 9pence to the 7th lock, and 1 shilling and 3pence to the 4th lock. Vessels laden with lime, manure, or material for roads, were granted free passage. By the second Act of Parliament, in 1800, the charges were raised to 3 shillings and 3pence per ton for the whole length of the canal, 2 shillings and 7pence to the 7th lock, and 1 shilling and 6pence to the 4th lock. Lime, manure, and road material being exempted, as before. The whole structure was completed in the autumn of 1802, and the canal was formally opened on Friday, September the 17th of that year. The occasion was observed as a general holiday by the townsfolk. At 1 o'clock the boats, the Betsy of Horncastle, and the Martha of Dalderby, the property of Messrs. Gilliatt and Wilson, and the British Queen, owned by Mr. Boyers, were hauled into the two basins of the canal, elaborately decorated with colours, amid the cheers of spectators, who are said to have numbered more than 2,000. The vessels having been brought to, several salutes were fired, and a band of music on the pleasure boat of Mr. Lane played God Save the King, Rule Britannia, Hearts of Oak, etc. Having traversed some distance on the canal, the company afterwards landed at the wharfs on the two branches, and a large number of the shareholders partook of a festive repast at the Greyhound Inn, East Street, near the South Basin. The navvies and other workmen who had been employed in the construction of the canal were also regaled on the boats, and afterwards feasted at the Greyhound. In following years an excursion was made annually by the directors, conveyed down the canal in a fine barge, which was their own property, named the Lady Banks, in order to inspect its condition, and this was followed by a public dinner at the Bull Hotel, which continued to be an established institution during the period of the canal's prosperity. The shares quickly rose considerably in value. A great number of barges came to the town, and it was no uncommon occurrence to see the whole distance from the South Bridge to the Bow Bridge packed closely with heavily laden vessels, carrying coals, grain, or other merchandise. In 1836 it was computed that about 30,000 quarters of wheat and 3,000 packs of wool passed through the canal annually, and in 1850 the profits of the traffic amounted to about £2,000 a year. Consequent on the opening of the railway in August 1855, the canal as a means of goods conveyance gradually became disused, until, of late years, it has become worse than a mere derelict, since it forms an obstruction to the free passage of the water brought down by the two rivers, and after heavy rain it has led to temporary inundations of the town, to the great inconvenience of those residing near it, as well as interfering, as might in some circumstances be serious, with the sanitary arrangements. A few years ago an attempt was made to restore the canal traffic, but the railway monopoly had become too thoroughly established, and the project failed. Yet the competition, could it have been maintained, might have had a salutary effect upon the cost of railway conveyance, to the advantage of the general public. Our canals, it should be remembered, are a time-honoured institution. The Lincolnshire Cardyke and Fosdyke date from the period of the Roman occupation of this country. The Magna Charta of the early 13th century took cognizance, not only of the roads called the King's Highway, but also of inland navigation, under the term Eau Stream de la Roi. The latter half of the 18th century was remarkable for great achievements as regards internal waterways, notably in the Bridgewater Canal and the Grand Junction Canal of London; and to this period, as we have seen, the Horncastle Canal belongs. In this 20th century, again, notwithstanding the great railway facilities, there is a widespread movement in favour of extended water traffic, headed by the very successful Suez Canal, with a prospect of the sister channel of Panama. Berlin is said to owe its prosperity largely to its well organised system, connecting the rivers Oder, Elbe, Spree, etc., which have an annual traffic of some 1.5 million tons. Our own Manchester Ship Canal is another instance, the most recent case being fresh developments of the Aire and Calder navigation, in South Yorkshire. The canals, too, which have been recently constructed in India, are yielding, by the latest reports, a handsome revenue to the government, as well as greatly benefiting the native population. It is acknowledged that a more general use of waterways, throughout the kingdom for the cheaper transport of our heavier and more bulky produce, would be a national boon, and a royal commission was engaged in considering the subject of the acquisition of all canals as government property. It is now being more and more recognised that on the establishment of railways every one jumped too hastily to the conclusion that the days of canals were over, whereas, in truth, there is still a large field, probably an increasing field, for the cheaper traffic in heavy goods which canals can provide for. The Belgian town of Bruges, though situated several miles inland, is now to be converted into a port by the government of that country, through the creation of a canal, which is expected to increase the prosperity of that city. Similarly, it is suggested that our own town of Nottingham could be made a great inland port, if water carriage were provided, and Sir John Turney, before the Royal Commission, has recently (July 1907) stated that the trade of that town might thus be greatly increased. These, be it remembered, are not isolated cases. As to our own local interests, we may reasonably regret that after so much money being invested in the Horncastle Canal, and the serious losses incurred by so many investors, no further effort should be made to utilise it. The trade of Horncastle is not so satisfactory but that we might welcome every adjunct which could in any way contribute to its furtherance; while, even from an aesthetic point of view, it were desirable that, with the present dilapidated locks, and the banks in some places broken, the channel, which is in parts little more than a shallow bed of mud, befouled by garbage and carrion, or choked by a matted growth of weeds, should be superseded by a flow of water, pure and emitting no pestiferous exhalations. End of The Canal, part of Chapter 9 of A History of Horncastle, from the earliest period to the present time, by James Conway Walter.